it's funny because the music scene and in Philadelphia sort of coincided with the revitalization of South Street at the time, actually, and a lot of the music and musicians were centered around that area, specifically a place called J.C. Dobbs, which hosted a lot of the original music scene and players, and there were a lot of, the music business is a two-way street. You got the audience and you got the players, and it was a time when both seemed to feed into each other. There were a lot of folks that were into making original music, but more importantly, there were also a lot of the audience folks that would come and watch and come and show up and watch you, and not want to hear necessarily cover songs. They wanted to hear what you were doing, as an original musician, and that fostered a lot of good players, and more importantly, a scene and a centralized spot that would support all of that. A lot of good folks that are still around today. A guy named Ken Queter is a guy who's around today. My good friend Alan James is one of the best guitar players on the scene. And I was fortunate enough to be a part of that and have a chance to play bass in several different bands and be able to sort of kind of make a living at it at the time. Has it changed? Well, South Street's changed, obviously, but things sort of kind of moved around for a while. So it kind of went from South Street to Fairmount, that section of the city, and then up to Manayunk, actually, a place called the Grape Street Pub. Then it seemed to get to a point where folks became less interested in original rock music, and DJs sort of kind of came in and sort of kind of took over. And I think that's what sort of kind of changed. But I think that there's still a strong scene. It just seems a lot more scattered than it used to be. A lot more decentralized. Let's put it that way. Some of the bands that stand out. Well, the person who really, and I mentioned his name before, but who sort of kind of started this whole scene was a gentleman named Ken Queter. He's still around now, and he had a band called the Secret Kids, and he was the person he papered this entire city with posters of himself saying, "I'm appearing here, Ken Queter and the Secret Kids," and when I say all over the city, I mean all over the city. There was nowhere you could go. You would get on the subway, there'd be posters there. So he sort of kind of like fostered that scene. But I mean, certainly there were bands from Philadelphia. American Dream was one of the early bands that was from around here. Todd Rundgren is from around here, But then some of the bands that were strong on the scene were bands like the A's with Richard Bush, who's, a lot of these bands at the time, the record companies were sort of kind of started looking at Philadelphia, and Richard Bush and the A's were one of those bands that actually got a record deal, with Arista, and actually went on the road. They opened up for Talking Heads a few times, but they had songs that should have been hits that weren't, but that's just what the music business is like. Of course, the Hooters obviously are from here. They're probably the most successful band. If you rule out bands like Hall and Oates, who
right.
moved out of town and became successful, the Hooters were the most sort of homegrown band that became successful. I was fortunate enough to be in several projects that became, I won't say famous, but became known very well in the local scene. A band called the Daves, actually, which was based out of a place called the North Star Bar in Philadelphia, sort of a legendary place. A band called June Rich that I had in the 90s. So the scene was strong. Is it strong now? I think that it still is. There's a lot of bands I'm not that familiar with anymore. So bands like War and Drugs and stuff like that that became big time in the Northern Liberties scene. So it's Philadelphia has been good to the original bands. Can you make a living? I don't know. I'm still alive, so. So I guess I started playing when I was about 12 years old, I guess, and I got my first acoustic guitar. That's what I sort of kind of started playing on. And when I was growing up, I was a huge Beatles fan. Let's get that out of the way. I was a huge Beatles fan, and actually that was one of the pivotal moments in my life, actually, because I actually, yes, I'm that old. I actually saw that on Ed Sullivan
Wow,
show. That guy, we sat around and watched that on television.
That's awesome.
But I was playing guitar and I thought that's what I was going to do. And then as I got involved with other musicians, there was a band that I wanted to be in, of course, amongst my friends. And like a lot of other bass players, and I think this will hold true if you ask a lot of people, I wanted to be in this band. They already had 2 guitar players, so I had to play. So I was like, okay, I'll play bass. And as it went along, you know, I sort of kind of realized the dual role that bass plays. It's essentially a rhythm instrument is part of that. It has to hook up with the drums, but it also sort of makes that bridge between the melody instruments and the percussion instruments, and it can play both roles at once. And you know, if you listen to any band, if you take the bass out, immediately everything goes away. You know, all that warmth, the pulse goes away, and I think that's what kept me involved in the bass, because I felt the power of the bass. And then I started listening to other bass players that were doing some really interesting things. Bass players like Paul McCartney, who's a great bass player. And if you talk to a lot of bass players, they'll mention Paul as like one of their influences, actually, because when you listen to the stuff that he does on his records,
it's great.
Like, it's pretty amazing.
That's good.
And you know, then later on in my life, another guy, bass player Jaco Pastorius, became sort of very important to me. And he was playing with one of my favorite artists, who was Joni Mitchell. We were talking about that before. You know, so the bass became not only a rhythm instrument to me, but also a melody instrument. I mean, I found that you could solo on it, you know, and you could play solo on the bass. It's a very physical instrument. You know, it's maybe not as physical with all your limbs as the drums are, but the strings are heavier, number one, so it takes a little more strength, you know, to actually become good, at it. Anyway.